When my parents handed my sister the keys to my house, they didn't do it with any sense of ceremony or guilt. There was no warning, no call, not even a half-hearted apology. It happened at Sunday dinner, right between Mom passing the roast and Dad asking if I'd finished that big work project. "So, Morgan," my dad said without looking at me, "we figured it'd make more sense for Emily to take over the house now that she's expecting. You're barely there anymore anyway." I remember blinking, slowly, like my brain couldn't quite translate what I'd just heard. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked. My voice came out flat, too calm for what was boiling under my ribs. My mother didn't even pause her slicing. Emily, my younger sister, the family darling, smiled like she'd just been handed a surprise vacation. "It's just temporary," she added, resting one hand on her barely there baby bump. "You're so busy, and you said the house felt too big for you alone." That wasn't what I said. What I said, 3 weeks ago during one of our rare sister-to-sister talks, was that the house felt quiet sometimes. Peaceful. Like breathing room. After 6 years of renovations, repairs, late-night patch jobs, and scraping money together for every single mortgage payment, I finally had a home I was proud of. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Mine. The house wasn't a gift from anyone. I bought it at 26 after clawing my way through a decade of cheap rent, bad roommates, and working 2 jobs. The down payment came from my savings and every birthday check I'd tucked away since college. I paid the closing costs. I chose the location. I signed every paper and cried in the car when I held the keys. It was the kind of victory no one really noticed but me. I was the one who dealt with the burst pipe in year 2, the broken water heater, the endless repainting of cabinets. Every inch of that home had my sweat under it. Which is probably why, when I stood there in the middle of dinner with a fork still in my hand and my parents just nodding along like this was normal, I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "You can't just give her my house," I said. "Actually," Dad said, clearing his throat, "your mother and I still technically hold joint interest in the title. You put us on back when you needed a co-signer, remember?" I remembered. I also remembered them promising it was just for formality, that they'd remove their names once the mortgage settled into a pattern. They never did. 3 days later, I saw the paperwork. Quietly filed. Notarized. Their legal interest transferred directly to Emily. It didn't give her full ownership, but it gave her enough. Enough to move in. Enough to start calling it hers. Enough for the utilities to begin showing up with her name on them. When I confronted them, this time over the phone because I couldn't stomach looking at them, Mom had the audacity to sound disappointed. "It's all in the family, Morgan," she said, like that made it fine. "You're successful now. You don't need to hang on to every little thing. You can always buy another house later." I hung up without responding. I was shaking, but I wasn't crying. I didn't have the energy to scream, and maybe that scared me more than anything else, that numb, hollow sense of fine, so be it. That night, I dug out the old drawer of property documents. I sat with the deed, the mortgage schedule, the inspection notes, the receipts for every last thing I'd paid out of pocket when the furnace blew or the gutter collapsed in year 3. All of it pointed back to me. I had the bank logs. The credit card bills. My initials on every maintenance order. What I didn't have anymore was a home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my patio, and listened to the wind against the wood paneling. I thought about how fast people could rewrite a story. How easy it had been for my parents to decide I didn't need the thing I worked hardest for. How entitled Emily must have felt to accept a house she hadn't paid a dime for. It was like being robbed, except the thief got a baby shower and congratulations from everyone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call a lawyer. I wanted to march right back into that kitchen and flip the table they loved eating off. But instead, I got quiet. Cold. Because I remembered something they must have forgotten. The house still had a mortgage. And the only person who'd ever paid it was me. The next morning, I called the bank and asked one question. What happens if the cosigner stops paying, but they no longer reside at or benefit from the property? The woman on the phone paused, then said in the calmest tone I'd ever heard, "Well, eventually, the property is repossessed. Unless someone else takes over the full loan." I thanked her. Hung up. and started making a new folder on my desktop labeled simply, "Let them have it." Calling the bank wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was shutting off the version of me that always felt the need to explain myself. I'd been the dependable daughter for so long I almost felt guilty when the woman on the other end confirmed what I already suspected. "Yes, Ms. Dunning," she said gently, "as one of the co-signers, you're within your rights to remove your auto-pay. If no payments are made, the loan will enter delinquency and eventually foreclosure. Unless, of course, someone else assumes full responsibility." I thanked her calmly and hung up without a second thought. There were no second thoughts. Only a strange, cool sense of relief that settled in my chest like the first breeze after a storm. If they wanted the house so badly, they could have it. But they'd have to take all of it, the mortgage, the taxes, the responsibility. I wouldn't fund their fantasy. Not anymore. I didn't give them a heads up. I didn't explain what I'd done or warn them what was coming. I just stopped. No more payments. No more scheduling yard work. No more answering group texts from my mother about Emily's nursery updates like I was some distant aunt instead of the woman who used to scrub mold from that same bedroom's closet wall. I went back to the apartment I'd been renting near the city. A place they'd always called temporary, like they were waiting for me to grow out of it. The truth was, I liked the silence there. I liked waking up in a space that didn't come with obligations stitched into the drywall. I'd worked too hard to build a life, only to be told I didn't need it anymore because someone else needed it more. The first call came from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. The second came from my mom. I didn't pick up. Then came the voicemail. Her voice sounded tight, trying to stay calm. "Hi, honey. There's a notice on the door from the bank. Emily's really upset. Can you give us a call when you get a chance?" I didn't. I listened to it while folding laundry and then went right back to my evening. The next few days were a parade of missed calls and frantic texts. Emily, of course, lost her composure first. "What did you do? The bank says the mortgage is unpaid. This is your loan, Morgan. I have a baby coming. Do you seriously not care?" I read the messages while sipping tea. Then I wrote back only 2 words, "Not mine." She responded with paragraphs. The last message called me selfish. Said I was abandoning her. That I was cruel. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel cruel. I felt sane. I felt like someone who had finally stepped away from a burning building instead of rushing in to rescue the people who lit the match. If she wanted the house, she could carry its weight. That included the debt. That included the fine print she never read. I wasn't a doormat anymore. I wasn't a donor. I was just done. A month later, I saw the address listed under pre-foreclosure filings on the county site. Quiet. Clinical. Just a case number and a red status line. No emotion. I thought I might cry when I saw it, or maybe feel that gnawing guilt again. But all I felt was distance. Like I was watching someone else's story from across a parking lot. Emily tried to mask it online with passive-aggressive quotes about letting go of what no longer serves you. Mom left a voicemail that sounded like she'd aged 10 years in a day. Dad never called at all. I thought that would be the end of it. I'd left the keys on the counter. I'd taken everything personal out of the place months ago. But then, 4 days later, I got a knock at my apartment door just after 8 at night. When I opened it, there was a man in a slate-grey blazer holding a clipboard and a folder. "Morgan Dunning?" he asked, almost too polite. I nodded, and he handed me the file. "This is regarding the property at 412, Haddington Lane. You're still listed on title. Someone's trying to process a transfer, without your approval." And that's when I knew Emily wasn't done trying to take what wasn't hers. Not even close. He handed me the folder like it was nothing. No drama, no fanfare. Just a man doing his job. "Someone submitted a title transfer request," he said, adjusting the clipboard as I flipped through the papers. "We need your signature to finalize it, given your standing on the mortgage and title. Otherwise, it'll be flagged." I stared at the form. It was all there, Emily's name typed into the new ownership field, a signed affidavit from my mother as a co-title holder, and even a notarized letter claiming consensual transfer for family-based occupancy. I could see my dad's signature at the bottom, scribbled like it always was when he was rushing. But mine, blank. Which meant this wasn't an oversight. It was another attempt to move me out of the story completely. And they had the nerve to try it after I'd already let the house sink on its own. They still thought they could drag my name into it like I was just a legal technicality instead of the person who built that house from the ground up. I looked up at the man. "Did Emily request this?" I asked, my voice as calm as I could make it. "The request came through a legal rep, not sure who retained them," he said. "But I'd guess it's someone close." He gave a polite nod, left a card in case I had questions, and walked off like he hadn't just dropped a match on a pile of kindling. I closed the door and locked it. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at the folder. My name was still on the loan. Still on the title. Still holding just enough weight to ruin whatever game they thought they were playing. And now they needed me. After all their silence. After the keys were handed off without a word. After my parents gaslit me into believing I was selfish for stepping away. Now I was the missing piece. And this time, I wasn't giving it. I opened my laptop, logged into the county clerk system, and filed an official response: title transfer denied. Ownership rights remain unresolved. It was just a formality, but it was also a full stop. They couldn't push me off the board without my permission, and now that I knew they were trying, I wasn't just stepping back. I was about to pull the rug out from under every delusion they'd built. If they wanted to weaponize family ties, they'd learn just how sharp mine could be. Emily texted the next morning. "What did you do? Why did you block the transfer?" No greeting. No pleasantries. Just the entitled panic of someone who finally hit a wall she didn't know existed. I didn't reply. Instead, I waited. It took 2 hours for her to follow up. "You don't even want the house anymore. This is petty, Morgan." And that was the moment I realized she still didn't get it. She thought I was fighting her. That I wanted to win some twisted sibling war. But I wasn't fighting for the house. I was fighting for the line that should never have been crossed. My mom called that evening. She sounded exhausted. "Morgan, can't we talk about this? You're making everything harder than it needs to be." I almost laughed. "No," I said. What made this hard was giving my house away like it was a party favor and expecting me to keep smiling. She tried to say it wasn't like that. That I misunderstood. That I was too emotional. But I cut her off. "I let the bank take it," I said plainly. "Because that was my choice. But you don't get to rewrite the terms again just because it's inconvenient now." There was a silence, and then a quiet, trembling, "She has nowhere else to go." "Neither did I when I bought it," I replied. "And no one offered to hand me a thing." After I hung up, I took the file out of my drawer and scanned the rest. It was clear they'd tried to make it all look legitimate. All the right phrases. All the legal boxes checked. But it still needed me. And that made me realize something dangerous. They weren't planning to wait much longer. They wanted to erase me from the story. Which meant they were likely planning something else, something bigger. Something messier. 2 days later, I got an email from the title office. Someone had submitted a follow-up request. This time, not for transfer, but for a removal. They were petitioning the court to declare me a non-beneficial interest. In simple terms, they were asking a judge to treat me like I no longer mattered. And just like that, it stopped being about the house again. This time, it was about my name. The lawyer's office was in a mid-rise on the edge of town, all neutral tones and fake smiles. His assistant greeted me like I was there for a routine notary, not a legal ambush. She offered me water. I declined. I didn't want anything from this place. Not comfort, not hospitality, and certainly not pleasantries. When he finally came out to the lobby, he was exactly the kind of man I expected: sharp suit, soft handshake, eyes that scanned for weakness. "Morgan Dunning?" he asked. "Thanks for coming. I figured it'd be better to go over everything in person." I followed him down a hallway that smelled like old carpet and printer ink and tried not to imagine what lies he was about to read off his clipboard. We sat across from each other in a small conference room. He pulled a file from his leather briefcase and slid it across the table toward me. This is the affidavit filed by your sister, Emily Harland. She's requesting the court remove you from the property's deed under family equity reassignment, based on financial contributions, occupancy, and recent abandonment. I didn't touch the file. She told the court I abandoned the house? He nodded. That's the claim. Along with statements from your parents. They're asserting that you relinquished your interest in the home by vacating it voluntarily and ceasing all financial responsibility, which, legally, could be interpreted as intent to transfer. I let the words hang there. It felt like reading the script of a movie I didn't audition for. I'd lived every line of this life, but now it had been rewritten without me and recast with a protagonist who wasn't just dishonest, but bold enough to say it under oath. He opened the file and began reading aloud. Affidavit Claim Item 3, Morgan Dunning has not resided in the property full-time since late 2022. She expressed disinterest in maintaining the home and implied that the mortgage payments were a burden. Implied? I snapped. I never implied anything. I was the only one paying them. I understand this is upsetting, he said with the mild, polished tone of someone who didn't understand at all. But this is the narrative the court will consider. It becomes a question of perception and precedent. I leaned forward. Let me ask you something. If a thief walks into a house I built and changes the curtains, does that make it theirs? He blinked but said nothing. I paid every bill. I dealt with every emergency. They gave it to her because they thought I wouldn't fight. And now she's trying to rewrite history because she wants a clean title. But I'm not going to make it easy. He cleared his throat. Then you may want to consider responding with a formal objection. Or possibly initiating a counterclaim for breach of implied agreement. Oh, don't worry, I said. I'm going to do a lot more than file an objection. I stood up, sliding the file back toward him without ever opening it. Let Emily know the next time she wants to erase someone, she should at least do it properly. Because I still have receipts. And I still have records. And when the judge asks who paid $14,000 in roof repairs after the 2020 storm, or who filed the emergency loan paperwork during the plumbing collapse, my name will be the only one that shows up. He didn't try to stop me as I left. He didn't need to. The damage was done. What Emily wanted wasn't just a house. She wanted a story without me in it. One where I was the cold sister who walked away, the absentee cosigner, the overachiever who couldn't be bothered to hold on to what she started. And the scariest part? I could already see people believing her. Because no one wants to hear the version where the person who does everything right still loses the thing they love. I went home and pulled out the fireproof lockbox I'd nearly forgotten about. Inside were every original inspection report, contractor invoice, utility setup confirmation, and mortgage statement from the first year. I scanned all of them. I backed them up. I created a folder labeled Original Owner, Evidence Chain. I wasn't building a case anymore. I was documenting a war. Later that night, I got a voicemail from my father. He sounded tired. Your mother says you went to see the lawyer. Maybe we went about this the wrong way, but we just want peace, Morgan. We're too old to be stuck in courtrooms. Can't we all just move on? I listened to the message twice. Then I saved it to a new folder labeled Emotional Leverage and moved on to prepping my next move. But the part that stuck with me wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. Not once did anyone ask why I stopped paying. Not once did anyone acknowledge that the house didn't just pay for itself. It was as if I'd never existed as an owner, only as a placeholder. A name on a loan they never thought would fight back. And I hadn't, until now. The court hearing was still 2 weeks away when the envelope arrived. No return address, no note, just a plain manila folder slipped through the mail slot like a message from a ghost. At first, I assumed it was another attempt to rattle me, maybe a legal warning from Emily's lawyer, or worse, another copy of that ridiculous affidavit trying to sell the fantasy that I'd handed over the house out of guilt. But when I opened it, there was just one photo inside. An 8 by 10, glossy, and slightly creased like it had been handled too many times. And there, frozen in time in the center of my old kitchen, stood my sister, Emily, smiling. her hands gesturing as if she was mid-story. Standing across from her was a woman I didn't recognize, wearing business casual and holding a clipboard. A realtor. I stared at it for so long I forgot to blink. The timestamp printed at the bottom corner of the photo was clear as day, October 3rd, 2022. Nearly 2 months before that Sunday dinner. 2 months before my parents suggested Emily take over the house. 2 months before anyone breathed a word to me about plans, changes, or family favors. So this wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't about my work schedule or the house being empty. This had been in motion. My house, my property, had been prepped, shopped around, and possibly positioned for sale or valuation while I was still paying for it. Still keeping it clean. Still covering insurance and utility bills from my account. I sat back in my chair and felt something in me shift. The betrayal had always been obvious. But this was proof of intent. She wasn't just gifted the house. She was preparing to use it. Flip it. Profit from it. And now she was standing in court claiming she needed it for stability, for the baby, for her new life. I pulled the photo closer and noticed a tiny blur in the corner, one of the cabinets I repainted by hand the summer I nearly broke my wrist after falling off the step stool. She hadn't even changed the fixtures. She was standing in a kitchen I bled into, smiling like it was hers. I scanned the photo, uploaded it to my evidence folder, and opened a new document. Timeline of events, proof of prior intent. I added the photo's date, the court filing date, the title transfer attempt, and every other milestone in between. The paper trail was forming. The problem with people like Emily wasn't that they lied, it was that they left too many breadcrumbs behind. And once you stopped caring about being the bigger person, you could follow those breadcrumbs straight to the fire. That night, I didn't call my parents. I didn't ask if they knew. I already knew the answer. They had to. The title couldn't have been shifted without at least one of them signing off. And even if they hadn't known about the realtor, they knew she wanted the house before they told me. They'd decided she deserved it more. That she needed it. That I was fine. That I could bounce back. That handing off the house was no different than borrowing a sweater. They chose the sister who never paid over the one who never missed a payment. 3 days later, I found out who the realtor was. I cross-referenced property tours on local listings and matched the face. Her name was Kara Jessup, and she specialized in pre-listing evaluations. I sent her a short, polite email. "Hi, I believe you visited a home at 412 Haddington Lane last October. I'd like to confirm if you were contacted for a walkthrough and by whom." She replied within the hour. "Yes, I remember that house. I was called in by a young woman named Emily. She said the home had recently been gifted to her by family and she was considering future options after the holidays." I read that sentence twice. Future options. She never intended to stay. All the crying voicemails, the passive-aggressive texts, the courtroom statements about security and needing a space to raise her child, they were performance. A mask she wore long enough to make me the villain while she painted herself the victim. But now I had proof she was planning her exit before she even moved in. I forwarded the email and the photo to my attorney with one line: "Use this." The next morning, I walked past the courthouse steps to drop off a notarized evidence packet. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was defending something. I felt like I was delivering a message. I don't need to keep the house. I just need them to remember whose it was. Courtrooms are colder than you expect. Not just in temperature, but in tone. Sterile. Detached. Like grief and betrayal aren't allowed past the metal detectors. I sat at the petitioner's table across from Emily, who wore a pale cardigan and soft makeup like she'd been coached to look fragile. Her lawyer was some sharp-mouthed man in his 30s who smirked like he already knew how the story would end. I hadn't brought a crowd. No parents, no friends, no performative support. Just me, my attorney, and a folder full of truths no one expected me to find. The judge entered. We stood. The case was called, and then Emily's lawyer began with a story. Not the truth, a story. One where I'd walked away from the house. One where my absence was emotional distance and my silence was disengagement. He talked about pregnancy. about maternal stress, about how the house was already becoming Emily's home. He painted me as detached, cold, capable. And in his closing remark, he said, "Sometimes, Your Honor, the one who needs less must be the one who gives more." It was manipulative, pretty, even, and wrong. Then it was my turn. I didn't speak right away. I let the room settle. I could feel Emily watching me, eyes glassy like she was prepared to cry if I raised my voice. But I didn't. I kept my tone measured, steady. "Your Honor," I said, "I didn't walk away from that house. I stepped back from people who thought it was okay to erase me from it." I slid the packet across the table. Inside is a photo of my sister conducting a private consultation with a realtor. The date is October 3rd, 2 months before my parents told me she'd be temporarily living in the home I purchased, maintained, and financed for 6 years. There's also an email from the realtor confirming the purpose of the meeting was a pre-sale evaluation. Not a move-in. Not a nursery prep. Evaluation. The judge flipped through the pages. No one spoke. Not Emily. Not her lawyer. I continued, calm. "My parents were co-signers on the mortgage, yes. But they never made a single payment. I added them because I was young, building credit, and trusted their support would be symbolic, not strategic. I never removed them because I never thought they'd weaponize that position against me. I was wrong." I glanced once at Emily. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her chin dipped. Her hands tightened around a folded tissue. "This case isn't about whether I still want the house. It's about whether someone should be allowed to take ownership of something they didn't build, didn't buy, and never asked permission to receive. It's about whether silence can be spun into surrender." I stopped. Took a breath. I didn't abandon the house. I was pushed out of it by a family who expected me to keep paying even after they took the keys. The judge closed the folder slowly, then leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Harland," she said, turning toward Emily, "do you have any response to the evidence presented here today?" Emily hesitated. Her lawyer whispered something. She cleared her throat. I didn't think she'd care this much. She said she needed space. She was barely living there anymore. Her voice cracked, and for a second, I saw the mask slip. Not sadness. Just fear. Fear of being caught rewriting the script too late. The judge nodded slowly. "Intent matters," she said. "Documentation matters more. I'll review the case and issue a ruling in the next 30 days. Court adjourned. We stood. Emily left without looking back. And I walked out of that building not because I was free, but because I had finally made sure they couldn't pretend I wasn't there. They say it takes 30 days for a ruling, but sometimes the verdict starts arriving long before the paperwork does. I didn't hear from Emily after the hearing. Not a call, not a message, not even one of her usual vague Instagram quotes about letting go of what doesn't serve you. Silence, like a guilty child waiting to see if the scolding will last. I didn't expect remorse. I knew her well enough to know that. But I expected something, an excuse, a panic text, a last-ditch performance. Instead, it was the bank that made the next move. I got the call while I was refilling my gas tank. A clipped, professional voice from the mortgage lender's office. "Ms. Dunning, we wanted to inform you that a forbearance request was submitted on the property at 412 Haddington Lane. However, as your name is still on the loan, we're obligated to reach out to confirm." I leaned against my car and stared at the sky for a second. "I didn't request forbearance," I said. "In fact, I haven't made any requests since I stopped paying. Whoever submitted that, well, they can take it up with whoever told them the house was theirs." The woman was silent for a beat. Then, "Thank you, Ms. Dunning. We'll make a note. The account remains under shared liability until further notice." I hung up and smiled to myself. Emily was scrambling. Probably hadn't realized how fast the bills would pile up once the house wasn't being floated by my bank account. I imagined her on the phone with customer service, pretending to sound composed while fumbling through answers. She had a baby coming. She had a fantasy life crumbling in her hands. And no matter how many Pinterest boards or nursery mood boards she posted online, she couldn't hide from a balance due. A week later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, as usual. Her voice sounded thinner this time. "Morgan, we know you're angry. But Emily's having a really hard time. There's talk of the bank initiating a lien, and she's just overwhelmed. I don't know what to say anymore. I wish you'd come by. We could talk. Like before." I sat on my couch and listened with one leg tucked under me, flipping through old documents as the voicemail droned on. She never apologized. Not once. Just the usual emotional accounting, measured not in right or wrong, but in how hard things were for everyone else. Later that night, I opened my laptop and checked the public filings again. Sure enough, the house was now flagged for payment delinquency. A notice had been posted online. The mortgage hadn't been touched in 90 days. Emily had never transferred the loan, never refinanced, never stepped fully into what they tried to hand her. She'd wanted the prize, not the process. The image, not the work. And now it was catching up to her. The house that was supposed to be her safety net had become an anchor, and she didn't know how to swim. 2 days after that, I got a text from an old high school friend I hadn't heard from in years. "Hey, is everything okay with your family? I saw something weird on Facebook from your sister and thought of you." I logged in and went straight to Emily's page. She'd posted what looked like an innocent selfie, until I read the caption, "When you work hard, good things come to you." Some people don't understand that, but that's okay. Some people stay bitter. The comments were polite, supportive, fake. But one stood out. Someone I didn't know had replied, "Didn't your sister buy that house though?" It had 2 likes. No replies. Just silence. And I knew that was the start of it. Because all it takes is one person peeling back the story. One person asking the question out loud. The image cracks, and the truth starts leaking out. She'd built her life on the version where she was the one who needed saving, and I was just the cold, distant sister who abandoned her. But now people were remembering. People were connecting dots. The ones who'd seen me post photos of the first coat of paint. The ones who remembered when I celebrated closing day. The ones who knew better. The house wasn't just turning into a debt. It was turning into a spotlight. And Emily was standing under it, alone. The envelope came on a Wednesday morning. No fanfare, no knock at the door, just a quiet thud against my doormat while I was in the kitchen steeping tea. The return address was stamped with the county clerk's seal. I didn't rush to open it. I took my time pouring my mug, letting the steam warm my face before I even touched the paper. I already knew what the letter would say. I'd felt the decision in my bones since the day I walked out of that courtroom. When the truth is loud enough, it doesn't need a judge to make it official, it just needs someone to listen. But when I finally opened the envelope and unfolded the 2-page ruling, I still read every word like it was the last sentence of a novel I'd spent years writing. The court had ruled in my favor. My name would remain on the deed. The petition for full transfer and sole ownership by Emily Harland was denied. The judge had cited the photo, the realtor's confirmation, the documented payments, and my formal objection as clear evidence that Emily's claim was not only premature but manipulative. That word stood out like it had teeth. Manipulative. Finally, someone other than me had said it. The judge went on to recommend a formal property reassessment and advised the parties to either resolve ownership through a legal sale or begin proceedings to dissolve the mortgage jointly. The tone was professional. The meaning was blunt. They couldn't steal my house. Not legally. Not anymore. But what I didn't expect, what stopped me halfway through my second read, was the other envelope tucked underneath the court's letter. No postmark. No name. Just a hand-folded piece of lined notebook paper stuffed into an unsealed envelope like someone didn't want to give it time to cool. I pulled it out carefully and unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted, fast, a little messy at the corners. My father's. It wasn't long. Not a letter, really. More like a release. "Morgan. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought you'd understand. You always understood everything. That was the problem. You always did more, so we expected more. I wish I could say we didn't mean to hurt you, but I don't think that would be honest. I think we just didn't care enough to stop ourselves when we should have. We assumed you'd be fine, like you always are. We didn't see you getting angry until it was too late. I can't fix it. But I wanted to say something while I still could. Whatever happens now, just know we were wrong. You were never the selfish one. No signature. I read it twice. Then again. My throat went dry, not with grief, not with anger. With recognition. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't even accountability. But it was the closest thing I was ever going to get from a man who never once in my life said the word sorry without swallowing it halfway. It was cowardly and small and late. But it was real. I folded it back up and slid it into the drawer with the receipts and records and signed forms, the drawer where I kept proof of all the things people thought I would forget. I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there with the ruling in one hand and that quiet, crumpled letter in the other and let myself feel the weight of it all without looking away. The house was still mine. But the damage had been done long before this hearing, before the transfer, before the bank ever knocked. The real cost had nothing to do with square footage or closing statements. It was trust. Time. The years I'd spent holding things together while they all assumed I wouldn't let them break. A few hours later, I got a text from an unknown number. So what now? No name. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back. Now. You deal with the mess you made. And I keep everything I earned. And I didn't hear anything after that. There are things you do quietly when you're ready to move on. You don't announce it. You don't ask permission. You just make the phone calls, sign the paperwork, and take the last steps like someone who's finally tired of standing still. That's what it felt like when I listed the house for auction. Not a rage move. Not revenge. Just business. Clinical, efficient, deserved. The judge's ruling gave me the green light to do what I wanted, and what I wanted was closure. The fastest way to get that was by taking the one thing they all danced around and putting it up on a public stage where no one could pretend anymore. I didn't call my parents. I didn't send a courtesy text to Emily. I let the legal notification do the talking. A letter would arrive at their door within 72 hours, informing them that the property at 412 Haddington Lane would be entering voluntary public auction unless all parties agreed to buy out or refinance. I knew they couldn't. Not legally. Not financially. Not realistically. The mortgage was still in my name. The lien notices had piled up. The bank was circling. And now, they had a countdown. I scheduled the inspection. Cleared the remaining paperwork. Showed up at the property the following week to walk the appraiser through the house I used to call mine. It was strange, stepping into that space again. The furniture was different. The energy wasn't. There was tension in the walls, in the corners, like the house itself knew it didn't belong to anyone anymore. Just a holding place for a mistake that had finally caught up with everyone who thought they could outrun consequence. Emily wasn't home when I arrived. That was probably for the best. I didn't want to fight. I didn't even want to explain. I just wanted to be done. I watched the appraiser take notes, ask questions, check boxes. The only room that still looked like mine was the laundry room, the one I'd repainted after a pipe burst in year 2. She hadn't touched it. Probably hadn't used it. There was something satisfying about that. She'd spent all that time trying to turn the house into a trophy and still couldn't make it a home. The auction notice went live the following Tuesday. My inbox exploded less than 2 hours later. First, a voicemail from my dad. His tone had shifted from guilty to stunned. "Morgan, what are you doing? You don't have to go this far. We can figure something out. You don't need to humiliate your sister." I didn't answer. Because it was never about humiliation. It was about visibility. About consequences. About letting the world see what happens when someone tries to take what wasn't theirs and finds out the hard way that ownership comes with cost. Then came the text from Emily. No pretense. No pleasantries. Just, "You're evil." I stared at the screen, then locked it without replying. Not because it hurt. But because it didn't. And that scared her more than anything. I wasn't fighting her anymore. I was moving past her. I was turning the page she'd tried to scribble herself into and leaving her name off the next chapter entirely. 2 days later, I walked past the house again. Not inside. Just by. On the sidewalk. No one was home. A real estate sign had gone up on the lawn with a bold red stripe across the top, auction pending. The windows looked darker than I remembered. The paint a little duller. Like time had finally caught up with it, too. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt finished. That night, I made one final note in the folder I'd been keeping since the first betrayal. They gave away the house without asking. So I took away the fantasy without warning. And when I closed the folder, I knew the next time they tried to tell this story, they'd have to say my name. Not as a villain. Not as the cold sister who left. But as the woman who made sure no one could rewrite her ending again. The auction was held at a local event center, neutral, polished, impersonal. The kind of place that hosts weekend wedding expos and Thursday bankruptcy hearings. I showed up 15 minutes early and chose a seat near the back, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't need to be seen. Not anymore. I'd played my part. I'd told the truth. Everything that happened next was just gravity doing its job. I wore a black blouse and no expression. My phone stayed in my purse. I watched. The house was third on the list. The bidding started modestly lower than its actual value, because it was still under partial debt review. But the interest was high. 3 hands went up fast. A man in a windbreaker. A woman in a pantsuit with a legal pad. A quiet couple near the front. I didn't know any of them. I didn't need to. Every number they called out was a clean cut, another step away from what used to be mine. And I welcomed it. 10 rows ahead of me, my parents slipped in just after the bidding began. I felt them before I saw them. My mother's nervous energy carried like static. My father was quiet, looking everywhere but at me. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did and didn't want to. That was fine too. We'd run out of things to say the moment they decided my silence was permission. The bid rose slowly. Steadily. Competitive, but calm. It settled just over $270,000, less than what I paid, but more than what the house had become under their care. The auctioneer called final notice. No one flinched. Sold, he said, striking the gavel. Just like that, the house had a new owner. Someone who didn't know our names. Someone who wouldn't walk into that kitchen and feel the weight of everything that had happened under that roof. That was the best possible outcome. My parents stood frozen for a moment. My mother turned toward the exit. My father lingered, glancing once toward the back, his eyes scanning the room like he expected a fight that wasn't coming. When they walked out, I stayed seated. I waited until the crowd thinned, until the papers were being shuffled and the chairs were being folded, and only then did I stand. I didn't take anything with me. No paperwork. No folder. Not even the court ruling I'd carried for weeks. I didn't need it anymore. The house was gone. The money was closed. The name had changed. And the part of me that kept looking backward was finally quiet. Outside, the sky was overcast. The kind of soft grey that feels more like a reset than a storm. I took one deep breath. Inhaled it. Exhaled it. Then walked across the parking lot toward my car, steps light, pace steady. I didn't turn around. As I opened the door, my phone buzzed. A single message. You really did it. No name. Just that. I smiled, just barely. Then typed back. Finally. And drove off. Some people will take everything from you, then act shocked when you stop giving. Morgan didn't burn bridges, she let them collapse under their own weight. And sometimes, that's the most peaceful revenge of all. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help more people hear it. Subscribe for more real, raw, and unapologetically powerful stories just like this. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your family gave your house away?